Good morning. Nvidia makes some of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips, which are used in artificial intelligence. Nvidia's exports of those chips to China were restricted by the Trump administration and by the Biden administration before that. But Nvidia is desperate to keep their access to the Chinese market because their survival as a company is dependent on it. Developments in the AI industry in the United States are all moving the wrong way. It's hitting a wall, and so will Nvidia if they're only allowed to sell its chips in the US market. So Nvidia needs to get back to China, and that's a big problem from two directions. American regulators don't want Nvidia chips sold in China, and the Chinese government itself is pushing suppliers not to use Nvidia's chips anyway. But Nvidia's second problem is moot if they can't get Trump to give them an export license. A month ago, the Trump administration said it would allow Nvidia to sell some of their AI chips models, the H20, in China, but they didn't follow through and issue the license. Jensen Huang flew to Washington to meet with President Trump personally, then agreed to give the federal government 15% of Nvidia's revenues in China. That essentially made the federal government of the United States a partner in Nvidia's business in China. That's the quote here. And in so doing, probably just made Nvidia's problem a lot worse with the Chinese government. But 2 days later, the Commerce Department issued the export licenses. Advanced Micro Devices is another company that will probably get the same deal to sell their chips in China. If Nvidia sells $15 billion of chips here, that would be over $2 billion heading Washington's way. This whole arrangement is certainly unconstitutional and a violation of Article 1, Section 9. It is a tax on exports against the Constitution. A literal act of Congress is required to raise taxes of any kind. But legal analysts point out that in order to have it heard in court, it needs to be either Nvidia or AMD to bring a suit to have it overturned. And they're not going to. In fact, it may have even been Nvidia's idea, an offer to pay the money in exchange for getting the export license. It sets a dangerous precedent. And the imagination runs wild how this can be abused by governments and by corporations. But Nvidia is happy, at least for now, and has approval by American regulators to sell their chips to China. The artificial intelligence industry in the US has big problems. American companies are spending a lot of money on AI, but not getting anything back. A McKinsey report showed that 80% of companies surveyed were implementing generative AI, but it's not paying for itself. The expectation was by now that AI would have already revolutionized American business. But except for a handful of tech companies that build AI systems and sell them, the payoff isn't there. Companies have budgeted to almost double spending on AI this year, $62 billion. But it will be years before there is a return on that investment. Corporate managements generally don't like to wait for years, so companies are giving up. S&P Global talked to over 1,000 managers last year. 17% of their companies abandoned their AI projects last year. This year it's 42%. These executives reported high levels of employee and customer resistance. Managers were hoping to use AI to reduce headcount and lay off employees. The CEO of Ford Motor said that AI will replace half of all white-collar workers in the United States. That right there explains the employee resistance the companies are reporting. Here is the report from McKinsey with the lead at the top. 80% of companies have deployed AI, and 80% of companies say they're not making money. Companies aren't the only ones paying a lot of money for AI and not getting much back. The data centers running thousands of Nvidia processors gobble up a lot of electricity, And households are paying for that. In New Jersey, electric bills are going up 20%. Power bills up big also in Ohio, Maine, and Connecticut. Building AI training centers is like building 5 nuclear power plants per year just for AI. We're not building any nuclear power plants, so electric bills can only go one way, and they will more than double in the next few years. And this is on top of the high inflation in electric bills since 2020. Up more than 30% just since then. There is a direct correlation between these two charts, retail energy prices and the electricity demand from data centers. Besides sucking up lots of power, data centers also need lots of water. And the newer ones, powered by Nvidia's newest generation, Blackwell chips, need more electricity and more water than the previous models, which were already causing lots of problems. And those problems are more acute in the West, especially in the desert Southwest, where there isn't enough water already. Finally, there's this. Across business and industry, the companies that do pay for AI say they aren't getting anything for it. But very few people are paying for it anyway. The biggest companies are going to spend almost $400 billion this year on CapEx for AI. But already they're hitting a wall because their customers aren't willing to pay to use it. Free cash flow is the lifeblood of a company, and it's in decline for these companies, except for Microsoft, who has a rich licensing deal with ChatGPT, and that might carry them a few more quarters until OpenAI runs out of cash. But Nvidia has been making lots of money despite all those concerns because they build the GPUs that the hyperscalers are investing in. At some point though, cash flow will decide how many Nvidia chips get sold in the United States. And there is no cash flow. There won't be any cash flow for a long time. And American politicians from all 50 states have voters screaming at them about high electricity bills. The problem for Nvidia is that all these problems are hitting at once in the US domestic market. But in China, none of this is a thing. Electricity prices are falling for everybody, and the consumers of AI in China are industrial and manufacturing, logistics and medicine, the real economy. We've shared our own experiences in Chinese factories that use AI for everything, and the efficiencies that are hard to believe, even as we're standing there watching it for ourselves. China is determined to lead the world in AI by 2030, and in stark contrast to the AI industry back home, everyone here is making money, with forecasts of 52% return on invested capital by 2030. China has access to more user data than any other country, more cheap electricity than any other country, and half of the world's top AI researchers and patents. In the United States, companies are abandoning their AI projects, but in China it's the opposite. Industrial enterprises, factories, application of AI more than quadrupled in a single year to 47.5%. Over a third are deploying it across multiple functions. This researcher at the NDRC basically is telling us here that this is a government initiative. Manufacturing is the focal point of competition among major powers. Promoting AI-driven industry upgrading is paramount for the Chinese economy. This piece goes on for several pages with company-specific examples of how they're creating efficiencies and cutting costs. The bottleneck is that there are still constraints in computing power. Nvidia executives read this part and realize that this is a problem China is aware of and China is determined to solve. And if they do so without Nvidia's chips, they'll never be able to sell them anywhere. So giving up 15% of the revenues for Trump to play with is a small price to pay just to be part of the conversation here. This is Hainan. Be good.
political leadership on this earth. The bosses and managers in our companies.